From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And during our first half hour today, field crop troubleshooting, if you will. K-State's Jeff Whitworth will urge you alfalfa growers to inspect your stands right away for signs of alfalfa weevil activity. Weevil feeding has exploded, he says, over the past several days, and treatment as soon as possible, says Jeff, may well be called for. Also, K-State's Romulo Lollato goes over several reasons why some wheat stands around the state have turned yellow and whether that should be of concern to you growers. Romulo says if this is the result of a nutrient deficiency, you still can take action to remedy that. And further ahead on this week's K-State Horticulture segment, Jared Hoyle passes along several recommendations on timely lawn weed control. Plus more ahead on this Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're listening to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. For you alfalfa growers, it's, to put it this way, the annual call to arms to line up your alfalfa weevil control measures. And it's high time to do so, our guest tells us. Jeff Whitworth, crop entomologist, K-State Research and Extension. And yes, with the warmer weather of late, the weevil is getting after it, you say, Jeff.
Yes. Thank you for having me today.
You bet.
A week ago, I guess it's 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago now, we were out looking in alfalfa because last year, 2018, if you all recall, we had a really cold April, maybe the third coldest on record. And because of that, the temperatures got down into the mid-20s and killed alfalfa weevil larvae just as they hatched from eggs. And it did that 2 or 3 times. And we generally have an extended egg hatch of alfalfa weevil larvae over about every year is a little different, but 4 to 6 week period of time. In 2018, the same thing happened, but fortunately we had weather conditions come in that helped provide natural control. And it killed the larvae, turned them black, they would hatch out. It doesn't kill the eggs. That's important to remember because the eggs are the overwintering stage. Eggs are adults, but mainly it's eggs. So last year, anytime the eggs would hatch, we'd have a little cold spell down into the mid-20s for a night or two, and it killed them. So most folks didn't have to spray their alfalfa last year. And that was really good. And that's really key because there's a lot of beneficials that use the canopy in the alfalfa fields just for resting sites. And there's a lot of lady beetles and parasitic wasps and green lacewings that are out there. And when we spray it for the alfalfa weevil, it takes care of those. It pretty much takes care of those because we use a general insecticide for alfalfa weevils for the most part. So last year we got by and we had a lot of beneficials going into the late spring and the summer and helped out for the rest of the year. So a lot of the growers were calling, and I was wondering if we're going to have a problem with alfalfa weevils this year because they were naturally controlled last year. So the thought being there weren't as many going into overwintering as there normally are. But not so.
That did not pan out.
No, we know now that at least in the fields that I've been in, probably 20 to 30 in the last 10 days, alfalfa weevils are doing just fine. We started finding the first eggs hatching probably the 4th or 5th of April, and they were just little tiny larvae just starting to feed, and I hope many of your listeners were actually going on to the MesoNet to track them because as of January 1st, the MesoNet tracks various locations around the state where they have weather stations, and they do the growing degree day system for alfalfa weevils. Mm-hmm. And it works pretty well. It actually worked really well. I was getting several calls just before they hatched and said, hey, the weevils should be hatching, but we're not seeing any yet. But then they did, okay? So actually it worked pretty well. But now we're past needing the MesoNet because they're there. The eggs are hatching. And we were out again last couple of days, Oh man, we're finding third instar larvae. When they hatch from an egg, they're first instars. They go through a second and a third instar, and then they'll pupate, and then they're done feeding. Alfalfa weevil is a univoltine insect, or there's one generation a year. I know it seems like there's a lot of them, but that's because the eggs are laid in the fall and in the winter and early spring, so you can get an extended hatch. But really, there's only one generation a year. So what we're seeing now is, I think, at least because of the warm weather we've had in the last 7 to 10 days, I think they're kind of bunching up. The eggs are hatching, and we're seeing third, second, and first instar larvae, and they're doing a lot of feeding. The normal sampling management that I like to recommend is the stem shake bucket method, not sweep nets. Sweep nets are a lot easier to use. A lot of guys use them, but that doesn't give you a treatment threshold. Sweep nets are great to go out and sweep and see what's out there, but then you got to come back and use some other method to get a treatment threshold. So we're actually kind of past the sweep net period also, because they're there. In all the fields we were in, the infestation levels exceeded 100%. Now, one caveat with that. With the stem shake bucket method, that means you very carefully and quickly pull a stem off or sever, however you do it, and vigorously shake it in a white bucket. You do that several different places in a field, and then you count the number of larvae in the bucket, and you count the number of stems. That gives you a % infestation.
And what's the critical percentage you're looking for?
Yes, and most of the time we use a 33 to 50% infestation level. So if you have one larva per 2 stems or 3 stems, that's probably time to treat. The caveat with this is, right now, when the adult weevils lay eggs, they'll lay several eggs in the stem of a plant. So we have found plants with at least 13 larvae in them, and other plants adjacent don't have any. Now, they'll spread out, so you'll have 100% infestation. So I still say if you have 10 stems and 10 larvae, even if they only came from 2 plants, it's still time to treat. That's why I say the caveat is, because a lot of them are still just now hatching out. When that adult female lays eggs, she inserts her ovipositor into a stem and lays a clutch of eggs or several eggs, and then the next stem she may miss and stuff. So the treatment threshold that we recommend is 1 per 3 plants or 1 per 2 plants. And like I said, all of the ones that we looked at in the last 2 days exceeded 100% easily. We were having like 150%. We'd find like 15 larvae per 10 stems, and all over every field. And some of the damage is starting to show up. When the alfalfa weevils feed on the foliage, or they start defoliating the leaves, as you drive by a field or as you get close, it has a silvery sheen appearance because they're taking out all the greenery, all the chlorophyll-containing plants, leaving the stems and stuff. Anyway, it gives a silvery appearance. We're seeing that already in several different places. Remember, at these temperatures, and we're getting, everything I saw for the next 10 days is going to be way above 48 degrees, and that's the threshold below which they quit feeding. Doesn't bother them. They just,
shut down.
They just, become quiescent for a little while. So it takes them 3 days to completely defoliate a plant. That's why I'm urging everybody right now, get out and look at your field. Make sure you're reaching the 3rd to 0.5% infestation level. And I would treat just as soon as I can. Now, what you want to do is get out and treat before this rain comes. They're predicting chance of showers maybe again Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. One of the questions I always get, how far in advance before the rain gets here do I have to spray?
How rain fast is the product?
Yes, exactly. Once that insecticide dries on that plant, the residual is okay. So, and then you're going to have probably 7 to 10 days residual activity. But these are all contact insecticides. So the larva has to hatch out and contact insecticide somehow. And remember, those plants are putting on new tissue. So I would get out, if you can get out with the ground rig, spray it. I would get it on 6 to 10 hours before it rains at least, and you'll be fine. And you should get a good kill. Now, there's more to come. Right. These insecticides are not going to kill the eggs. I don't care what you see, what you hear. The egg stage is not susceptible to an insecticide. Now, it may kill the larvae as soon as they hatch out, but it won't kill the eggs. So if these eggs are in stems, and they elongate and they get on some place where there's no, and the larvae come out and gets on something that's not treated, they can continue to feed. So what you need to do is treat your field and then go out 7 to 10 days after treatment, post-treatment, and sample again.
And one finer point, Jeff, because contact with the insect is paramount to control, making sure that that product is getting where it needs to be upon application.
Good point. Right? Make sure you use plenty of carrier, i.e. water. Ground rigs do a pretty good job. If you can get down with aerial application, that's fine. Sometimes you can't get in the field with a ground rig because of rain or whatever. So if you whatever you use, make sure you get canopy penetration because these are contact insecticides. The larvae right now are in the terminals, and they're hard to shake out of a bucket. The really small ones you almost can't dislodge into a bucket. That's why sometimes you can go out and check a little bit early and they're just hatching out. You're starting to see little pinprick holes in leaves, little frayed terminals or chewing on the terminals. They're there. You just can't find them because they're really hard to dislodge. You about have to tear the plant open. But once they get into the late first instar, second instar, so that you can see them a little better, then they dislodge pretty easily. But still, they're pretty well protected in those terminals. One of the other questions I always get, are there any beneficials out there? We just talked about lady beetles, coccinellas and stuff. No, they're not going to help you. I've never seen a beneficial actually reduce an alfalfa weevil infestation. About the only thing right now is an insecticide application. So you need to, once you decide to treat, you need to contact your local applicator or go to our KSU alfalfa insect management guides and select an insecticide that's registered for use. Get it on. These things are out there feeding 24/7.
Well, last year was the anomaly, regrettably. This year they're back, the alfalfa weevil, so producers take all measures to jump on that problem as soon as you possibly can, says our guest. And Jeff, thank you. We'll welcome you back again soon.
Yeah, I wish I had better news, but that's the state of the alfalfa weevil right now. So thank you very much.
That's the reality of it. Jeff Whitworth, crop entomologist, K-State Research and Extension with us. And you're listening to Agriculture Today with more shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Tuned in to Agriculture Today, and welcome back. A status report once more on our winter wheat crop in Kansas, and zeroing in on a condition that's fairly prevalent out there in fields around the state, and that is yellowing wheat and what might be going on there to lead to that off-color wheat. Romulo Lollato is by our way once again, wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. The yellowing in wheat stands. This could be, you say, Romulo, the product of any number of conditions.
Hi, Eric. Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on air here today. And, during this time of the year, it is normal for us to start seeing some fields kind of turning yellow. If we think of what's going on with the crop, right, it just went through the winter, and it hasn't really done much as far as growth goes. Now, once temperature starts warming up, it's going to start growing. And so with this increasing crop growth, we also have an increasing nutrient requirement that the crop needs. So any deficiency is going to start showing. We had a period, actually a pretty cold winter, so there are some diseases that are favored by that. That might also be partially responsible for that yellowing in the field. So, yeah, there are a number of factors that can be causing that yellowing, and we're starting to see it now because up to now the crop had very limited growth.
Starting with nutrient deficiencies then, there's a chance that there might well be a nitrogen deficiency out there, and that could go back to our overly saturated soils.
Definitely. So nitrogen, if we think is one of the nutrients that are used in higher amounts by the plant. So as the plant starts growing now in the spring, it's going to increase its needs for the nitrogen, showing those deficiencies. If we think of the weather during the winter, we had a lot of saturated soils, waterlogged soils, that depending on temperature conditions can increase our denitrification and we can lose nitrogen through that process in saturated soils. In soils that are more on the sandier side, so that we might actually have lost nitrogen through leaching, right? So even producers who put quite a bit of nitrogen before need to see if the symptoms are going to fade away here in the next few days, because there is a chance that as the weather warms up, actually the crop starts growing and gets out of that some. But if the soil is low in nitrogen, we might need to correct for that. And we're almost past the window at this point. So yes, nitrogen deficiency is definitely one of the potential causes. And if we're looking for that, the typical symptom that we're going to look for, remember that nitrogen is mobile in the plant, and so it's going to go from the older leaves to the new growth. So we're going to look for a pale yellow color, typically on the older leaves. The other nutrient that can also cause yellowing is sulfur. So if sulfur is deficient, that can also cause yellowing, although the typical symptom is going to be different from nitrogen. Now, sulfur is immobile in the plant, and so it's not going to go from the older leaves to the new growth. So actually, the yellowing is going to show in the new growth instead of in the old growth. That's a very important difference between looking for deficiency as sulfur and nitrogen. Another important difference there is that sulfur is going to, instead of being a pale yellow, it's actually going to be more of a bright green color. So the field is going to look much more on a bright green as opposed to a pale yellow. Sulfur deficiency has been more and more common in Kansas fields over the years because we're depositing less sulfur in the atmosphere. And so we are seeing more and more sulfur deficiency. But luckily, it's an easy fix. So the crop is not going to use more than maybe 20 pounds of sulfur per acre, and that's total. The crop is going to uptake between all the leaf, stems, and grain, right? And only about, if we're talking about 80 bushel crop, for example, only about 6 or 7 of those are taken up with the crop. The rest comes back to the soil. So it's an easy fix when producers are doing their nitrogen application. Many producers are already adding sulfur, especially producers who are using liquid nitrogen, just as an easy fix for that problem. But that definitely can be one of the reasons for yellow wheat this year.
But once more, if you're going to correct either of these deficiencies for the benefit of this stand this year, that happens very quickly, or should.
Definitely. So the crop uptake for nitrogen and for sulfur, they're very similar, and it really spikes now with the crop growth. Once it gets into jointing and the second node, and pretty soon we're going to be on flag leaf emergence, that's already too late. So if we want to do something about the yield potential of that crop, we need to be on top of that now, preferably before jointing.
Well, Romulo, you say also that this yellowing wheat may be the product not so much of a direct nutrient deficiency, but plainly of poor developed root systems out there.
That can be as well, and I think this year that might be true for the crop. Again, the half of the crop that got planted late into very wet soils. That saturated subsoil can have restricted some of the root growth, and we might be seeing on that late planted soil the lack of root development for two reasons. One, perhaps excessive moisture, and two, just we never really had enough temperatures for the crop to really grow. What we're seeing above ground reflects really well on what the crop is doing below ground as well. So if we're not seeing a lot of top growth, they're likely restricted root growth development as well. With that, if we think the lesser the volume that the roots are exploring, the less nutrient it's going to be able to uptake, the less water it's going to be able to uptake. So all of that root system, a restricted root system, can definitely cause any of the other deficiencies that we talked before, just because the crop has less access to those resources. And
in the case of poor root development, there's precious little that one can do right now about that, presumably.
Definitely. There's not much we can do. We're talking about excessive moisture, right? But that was until a few weeks back. And now we are already, for parts of the state, in, again, kind of a dry condition, although the moisture is in the subsoil. Now, if the roots cannot get to that moisture in the subsoil, that's not going to be used by the crop. So if we have some more rainfall here in this week as it is forecast, that can help the root continue to develop and reach the subsoil moisture.
Very good.
From a management perspective, not much we can do.
Well, it's roughly a week ago today that Kansas saw quite a temperature swing, to say the very least. Temperatures, in fact, plunged around the state, some as much as 60-degree differentials or better. Could that have had any adverse impact on wheat to the point of leading to this yellowing condition?
That definitely could. And in fact, we had some producers calling and with symptoms that are very, very typical of just cold damage. So this temperature swing that you mentioned, it's going to affect the crop, whether that crop was still tillering or if it's jointing it. And the further it is in development, the more susceptible to cold damages the crop is going to be. Now, I don't think that the temperatures that we got last week were cold enough to damage the developing head. So if we think of the most advanced fields that I visited last week, we're about jointing. So I don't think we have many fields that are past that, perhaps with the exception of southeast Kansas. But for the majority of the growing region, I think we're about jointing or just past that. And the crop can handle temperatures as low as about 25 degrees Fahrenheit quite well at that stage. I don't think we had any damage to the growing point. Now, we could see damage to the foliage, typically by kind of drying from the tip inwards. And so that definitely we're going to see, and we are already seeing, getting some questions from producers. Another thing that really affects that is if the crop was planted in heavy residue. So, for example, if we just harvested a soybean crop and the straw distribution was not very homogeneous and we're planting that crop into heavier, thicker straw, what's going to happen is that back in the fall, once the seed is germinating, it is going to form a crown, right? And that crown is going to typically be formed about half an inch to an inch below where the coleoptile sees light, right? So the seeds start to emerge, the coleoptile goes through the soil, then it needs to go through an inch or two of residue, so it's going to find light only above the residue. But the crown is still going to be formed an inch or half an inch below the coleoptile. So what happens there is that the crown is going to be formed very close to the soil surface, and so it's going to be more exposed to cold temperatures because there's really no buffer. There's no soil to buffer. It's too close to the surface. And so we have a temperature like last week that could hurt some of our stands and that could cause some yellowing. As long as the crown is still alive and it's not mushy and it's not really dying back, we should have minimum damage from that. Now, if the crown was damaged, then we can have some yield loss. But your overarching point here, producers need to get out there, take a look at exactly what is happening with their wheat that would be leading to this yellowing condition, and then act accordingly. Definitely. There can be many possibilities. We have an e-update article that just came out with several photos and what to look for. So if you are seeing symptoms or yellowing wheat, I would encourage you to look for this recent e-update that we have on the K-State Department of Agronomy. And also feel free to reach out to me either on social media, which would be on Twitter or Facebook at the handle @KSU Wheat. So producers are welcome to reach out to me, and I'll be glad to work with them to find out what's happening in their fields. In fact, you'd welcome photos of what's happening in the field to help with that analysis. So @KSU Wheat on either of those social platforms, Facebook or Twitter. Always appreciate the word. Romulo, we'll be talking again soon, undoubtedly. Many thanks to you. Thank you, Eric. He is a wheat production specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Romulo Lollato. Once more, look for this e-update article that was posted this past Friday, April the 12th, on what are the causes of yellow wheat. That is at agronomy.ksu.edu. Agriculture Today continues after this break. This is the K-State Radio Network.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128-plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Welcome back. Eric Atkinson with you, and with today's agricultural news headlines for you now, courtesy in part of DTN. Congress appropriating funds for Midwest levee repair doesn't necessarily mean that's where the money would go if the Army Corps of Engineers and the White House use cost-benefit analysis to decide which levees to rebuild first. That was one of the key takeaways for 4 U.S. senators, including one from Kansas, who held a field hearing in Glenwood, Iowa yesterday for the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee on the current state of Missouri River flooding. Major General Scott Spellman, the Deputy Commanding General for the Corps of Engineers, Civil and Emergency Operations, told the senators the current flood topped 32 federal levee systems or put them completely underwater, as well as causing 114 other breaches in levees. Highlighting the magnitude of that destruction, he said even to plug just 2 levees near Hamburg, Iowa, would take 100,000 dump trucks of material. Seeking to counter the repeated complaints that other priorities dominate the Corps' management of the river, Spellman emphasized that, quoting here, the number one priority of the Corps in its operations is life and public safety. Spellman pointed out there was little the Corps could do in and around March the 13th through the 17th to control the water flowing throughout Nebraska. The Niobrara River, for instance, he said, normally runs at 4,000 cubic feet per second. At its peak, the Niobrara was sending 180,000 cubic feet per second straight into the Missouri. Spellman also added that so much of the flooding occurred in unregulated rivers downstream from the Missouri River dams, such as the Platte River. The sheer volume of water in those rivers, he said, overwhelmed the levee system. The 6 upstream dams could not have prevented that, he said. While senators and others who testified called for higher levee protection and more levees, Spellman also noted the Corps currently has a $98 billion backlog of unfunded projects, of which roughly 1/3 are flood control projects. Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, who chaired the hearing, said afterward that Congress needs to spell out that flood control supersedes other functions for the Corps. Despite the testimony, Ernst said she believes the Corps puts too much emphasis on environmental protections for endangered species over the lives and property of people. And Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa said he understands the Corps may need $10 billion to repair the federal levees. He said, though, that doesn't address the need for higher and bigger structures. While the senators stressed river management changes to provide better flood control, when it comes to funding the Corps, the biggest concern now is reestablishing the levees that were there. Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas expressed concern about the Corps testimony regarding flood protection. At other times, other priorities take place, he said. Everybody I've talked to, said the senator, said it's just their priority in advance of a flood. Now, each of the senators stressed the need to pass the emergency appropriations bill, which would boost aid for several disasters. Different House and Senate versions of that bill remain tied up in the Senate because of the new Midwest disaster and funding for Puerto Rico from the 2017 hurricane. The USDA and FDA are working together now to jointly monitor the developing cell-based food industry. More on that from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
USDA's Deputy Undersecretary for Food Safety, Mindy Brashears, explains how the agency will work with the FDA to regulate the budding cell-cultured food industry.
There was some debate over where these products were going to fall. So what's going to happen is FDA will oversee the cell lines where the product is produced. So we'll have cell lines that are maintained, and that really pulls on their level of expertise.
She was speaking at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln.
Once the product starts being produced, the USDA will take over.
There are no cell-based food products yet available to American consumers, but the U.S. government is not sitting back and waiting until there are.
We have a working group put together with FDA with actually 3 different working groups under one umbrella to come up with standards of identity, how it's going to be labeled, and where we're going to go with these products.
This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Next up on Agriculture Today, our weekly feature on a Thursday, the Kansas Soybean Update. Waiting with that, as always, is Greg Akagi. Greg?
Kurt Marth from Oakley serves as chairman of the Kansas Soybean Commission. And Kurt, the Kansas Soybean Commission was one of 5 state grain commodity commissions whose results of recent elections for District 7, 8, and 9 were announced by the Kansas Department of Agriculture.
In District 7, Gary Robbins is going to be the commissioner for that district. He grows soybeans in Pottawatomie County. Gary is a fourth-generation farmer from Hazleton. He is current member of several commodity and community organizations, including the Kansas Soybean Association, the Kansas Corn Association, and Kansas Wheat Association. Gary is a past participant in the DuPont Young Leaders Program and the Syngenta Leadership Program. Gary takes the place of Jim Swaninger, who has served since 2004. Jim will be missed by all, as he's been a longtime commissioner and has filled the position very well. In District 8, we didn't have anybody running for that position, so the commission has appointed Bob Hazelwood to fill that position. Bob has been serving there for quite a few years, so he is very familiar with the commission and what processes that we take care of. In District 9, Mike Beller was elected. He is a soybean, corn, wheat, and hog farmer in Elk County. He's very active in several associations, including the Kansas Soybean Association, the Kansas Wheat Growers, Kansas Corn, and Kansas Farm Bureau. He's also in the Kansas Livestock Association and Kansas Pork Association. He has also been involved with leadership roles on the local Farm Credit Board, the Farm Service Agency, County Committee, and local Farm Bureau Board. Beller is a graduate of Fort Hays State University of the BS in Ag Business, and he has also been serving in this position for a while, so he also understands what the commission, and he's very focused on watching over the checkoff dollars and how it's being spent for the Kansas soybean farmers in Kansas.
Now, those 3 positions were for Eastern Kansas district positions. I know there's going to be elections for the central counties, Districts 4, 5, and 6, and those who are interested in that position, that's due later this year?
Yes, it is. Usually they are due by November 30th of the year. So if anybody's interested in serving in a commission position, they need to go online to the KDA, and you can pick up the petition that you have to fill out. What you have to do is get 20 signatures from area farmers in your area to sign them up to vote in the commodity elections.
That's Kurt Marth from Oakley, who serves as chairman of the Kansas Soybean Commission. He joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
And that from Greg Akagi. As always, thanks, Greg. Have you checked out our podcast service yet? If you haven't, go to this address, agtoday.net. You can tap the subscribe button there, and brand new episodes of the broadcast will arrive automatically on your device every weekday. This is Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
We're back now on Agriculture Today and with our weekly horticulture segment. High time we got into lawn care once again, and more specifically this time around, lawn weed management at this stage of the spring. Jared Hoyle has joined us once more. He's a turfgrass specialist with K-State Research and Extension. And because in part of the ample soil moisture conditions, we've seen more than a flush of broadleaf weed out there, Jared.
Yes, that's right. So right now we're seeing a lot of the dandelions put the flowers on. We really like the fall weed control for dandelion control, especially it gets just a better kill on them. But there may be some escapes. There may be some that didn't all the way die in the fall time. So now is a good time to go out, maybe spot spray with some 2,4-D type products to kill those dandelions or maybe some other broadleaf weeds. And so if you don't have to spray the entire yard, you can do those spot areas. Or if it's just a couple dandelions here and there, just pull them up. But make sure you get that taproot, otherwise they'll keep coming back. And you might be surprised if the soil's wet enough, you can extract that taproot. So yes. Give it a shot. Yeah, it's worth a try because then you know you've got it 100%. That is a 100% weed control method.
But beyond dandelions, there are other things going on broadleaf weed-wise out there, and you can accomplish the same control with a 2,4-D application?
Yeah, that's right. So knotweed is another weed that we're seeing. It germinates early in the year, February. When it germinates, it kind of looks more like a grassy weed, but as it matures, it forms a pretty dense mat, and they're tough to control. So making sure you get one of those 3-way selective broadleaf herbicides on it. On the knotweed, that'll control the dandelions and any other maybe little broadleaf weeds that are escaped. This will also clean up some chickweed and some henbit that are the winter annual weeds. Those will die out as soon as it gets warm this summer. So if that's all you have in the lawn, you might not need or want to go out. They'll just kill themselves off with the first big heat spell we have. But if you've got a kind of a mixture, it might be worthwhile to go out and spot spray these areas with the 2,4-D type products.
And get on that as soon as possible, just
yes.
to suppress all of those problems. You say also, Jared, this would be a time to think about pre-emergence herbicide treatments against summer annuals.
Yes, right now is the time. Calendar date, we really like April 15th is kind of the day that we shoot for on the calendar, but Mother Nature has told us with the forsythia starting to bud out and the red buds budding out, that is a good time to go out and put your pre-emerge herbicide out. That's when the soils get about 55 degrees for 4 or 5 days in a row. Right at about 1 inch is when crabgrass will start germinating. So the pre-emerge herbicides, we're going to look for those crabgrass type species and summer annuals that are coming back from seed year after year after year.
And as far as product selection for this particular project, a number of options available to?
There are a number of options out there. Most of them in the lawn care section or gardening section are going to say crabgrass preventers or pre-emergence. There's Dimension, Barricade. There's a lot of different products with multiple different active ingredients in it. So just check on the bag that it has that pre-emerge product in it and apply it at the right rate. They may be on some fertilizers. If that's the case, make sure that coincides with your fertilizer program as well. And that product needs to be watered in. It's unlike the post-emerge where you don't want it to rain right after, like for the dandelion control. You want to put that down, whether it's granular or liquid, and let it water it in. It forms a barrier on that surface, and so we're trying to kill that germinating seed. We're not really killing the seeds. We're just, when the crabgrass germinates, then it hits that barrier that's on the soil surface and then ends up dying.
Now, the time window that's available to the homeowner in applying these pre-emergents, how late can they go?
So once it starts germinating, the pre-emerge herbicides will only prevent the crabgrass and other summer annual weeds for the rest of the summer. Yeah. So if you have crabgrass already germinating or foxtail or any other goosegrass or any other summer annual weed, if you put the pre-emerge down, it won't kill those existing weeds, but it will have that preventative barrier throughout the rest of the summer because the temperatures are going to be warm, and with afternoon rain showers here and there, then you'll still get germination. There is one product called Dimension that is a pre-emerge herbicide but does have a little bit of post activity on very young crabgrass. So if you do see some crabgrass, some small young 1 or 2 leaf crabgrass in your lawn, make sure you get a product that contains Dimension in it, and then that will kill the existing crabgrass, and then it will be a pre for the rest of the year.
So if one employs the herbicide properly or the product properly, a secondary treatment may not be necessary.
That's correct. Depending on the product, some of the products last longer than others. The label will say will last 90, 120, how many ever days. And that's also rate dependent. So if you put a high rate on, right now, that should get you through the year. But sometimes we look at to what's called split applications, where you'll put half of it on now, and then you'll wait 6-7 weeks later and put half again. You put a barrier on the soil, and then as it degrades, you just put a new barrier on the soil instead of having one thicker barrier. Sometimes that ends up working really well.
Consider all of this, but the point, act fairly soon on that pre-emergence against those summer annual weeds. Don't delay too much longer. Now, one more thing here, and you mentioned this with the crabgrass preventer potentially as an ingredient in a weed and feed product. This is also a time to think about fertility for those cool season lawns.
Yes. So we really like the post weed control. Fall is the best time, and that's Fall is the best time for feeding your tall fescue lawns and your bluegrass lawns. That really gets good root growth because the soils are warm, the air temperatures start cooling off. But if you didn't get a fall application out, or if it's looking a little sickly this year, you can do a springtime application on cool season grasses. You don't want to over-fertilize or put too much because you get too much shoot growth and not a lot of root growth. So we really like to maximize at maybe a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet and look into one of these slower release products. So it's not all going to be available to the plant right now. It'll slowly release it through the next couple months to give it what it needs to grow. If you over-fertilize, you tend to have more diseases. You can get more weeds. So right now, if you stick to about 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet on tall fescue in a slow-release form, and right on the label, it'll say what percentage is a slow release in the bag.
Very well. Good tips all, and we will welcome you back soon. Thanks for coming over.
Thank you.
Turfgrass specialist Jared Hoyle, K-State Research and Extension, with some weed control and lawn fertility management thoughts for you homeowners to consider at this very point in time on this week's K-State Horticulture segment. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and we invite you to rejoin us right here this same time tomorrow. Until then, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.